this third episode of the National Association of Scholars Restoring the Sciences webinar. We're pleased that you're here today to join Luana Maroja. I just made sure I was pronouncing Luana's name correctly, who is professor of biology at Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts. She is chair of the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology program. And welcome, Luana, to our little webinar. Before we get into our discussion, which promises to be a lively one, I would like to share with you a little clip of an interview, or actually a debate between Luana and Holden Thorp, the editor-in-chief of Science magazine. So you should be able to see a video screen right now, and the clip is just about a little over a minute long. So here it is.
Well, let me go back to the questions, and here's one that's a little bit pointed, and since it's pointed more at Holden than Luana, I'll
bring it on.
Must the college classroom be a place that coddles students' frailties as opposed to a place where they learn to confront uncomfortable truths and challenges?
I am happy to answer that. I think
okay, you go ahead, and then we'll let Holden weigh in. Thank you.
Our obligation as teachers. And, even if you have kids, right, think, what do you do to your kids? Do you want to coddle them and protect them from every potential risky activity that is out there? I certainly don't do that to my kids. I don't do that to my students. So I think that they need to be able to push back against things they disagree with.
Well, Holden, you've expressed a slightly different view. So
yeah.
Let's hear from you on this.
Look, higher education was invented when the only people there, Chris, were people who look like you and me. It was invented. That's
only younger versions of you.
Well, younger versions, yes. And so it carries a legacy of exclusion.
Okay, so we are back. That clip is obviously edited. I would definitely recommend that you pay a visit to the YouTube channel, where you can see the entire thing. And let me see if I can find the link for you here. No, I don't have it. Well, look on YouTube under Luana Maroja. I thought I had it all lined up here, but I don't. But the whole thing, which is 90 minutes long, is worth looking at. But I want to come back to the contrast between what you said about how you handle controversial topics in class with students and what Holden Thorp said. But first, I'd like us to put our science nerd hats on for a little bit. You're an evolutionary biologist, so am I, and what intrigues me about your work is a particular interest of mine, which is cognitive drivers of evolution. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind taking a couple of minutes to tell us something about you as a scientist.
Sure. So I am an evolutionary biologist, and I've been interested in hybridization, which is when two species come together and produce hybrid individuals. These hybrid zones exist in nature. And through these hybrid zones, you can actually have gene flow from one species into the other. So much like, let's say, Neanderthals and humans have had gene flow. My cricket species, I work with crickets, have had gene flow as well. So we're interested in finding genes that can and cannot flow, and finding barriers that prevent the two species from becoming a single one. So what prevents them from freely mating with each other and becoming a single species? So within these barriers, there are many things like the song they mate, sexual selection preferences, how they smell, like the cuticular hydrocarbon is a compound that they have on their exterior, all insects do, that also signals sexual status, if you will. And in the case of these particular crickets, is dimorphic as well. So let's see what else. We recently discovered that some of the females they look like males in terms of their chemical composition. So that has been very interesting. And we're working, what is the consequences of that? We initially thought that those females would be less favored by males, but it turns out it's actually the opposite. The males court them more promptly than they court other types of females. So we're working with that. We're also looking at the genes that can and cannot flow across the hybrid zone. So there is a number of things we do in these hybrid zones. And I also work with other hybrid zones. Recently, a monkey one in Brazil, which is interesting. Mammals, they're more charismatic than crickets.
Yes. Well, as someone who works on termites, I can tell you all about the lonely life of someone working on a non-charismatic animal. But the whole issue of cognitive drivers and evolution is fascinating, because it's actually where most biologists are. But the public impression of evolutionary biology is it's run by this kind of dogmatic cadre of strict gene selectionists. That it's very kind of gene deterministic kind of a thing. And I've certainly run into some issues with strict gene selectionists. I wonder if you have as well.
So what in terms of genetics and selection, what we've been looking for is genes which the two species are completely distinct versus genes that they share a lot of alleles, and seeing if there is anything in particular about the distinct genes, which, some models assume that they can flow across the hybrid zone, or that there was a lot of selection for these genes. And in our case, it was interesting that almost all of these very distinct genes are located on the X chromosome. We don't know what they are. We don't know what their functions are. We don't know even if they are related to reproduction. The cricket genome is not all well put together. We have a preliminary version, which is very preliminary. So, so we're looking for patterns, but we can't tell much about individual genes or selection patterns or anything like that. Yeah,
fascinating. So let's get back to the woke revolution in science. The thing that struck me about this encounter with Holden Thorp was the two very different conceptions of what science is, and how you train students to deal rationally and logically and dispassionately with controversial subjects. And I know you spent a lot of time talking about racial differences in IQ and the issues around that, and how you interpret it and how you think about it, and these kinds of things. I think the thing that you expressed in that clip was that you have to train students to be able to handle these kinds of things that rationally, without melting down into a puddle. Otherwise, you don't have a free society anymore. If you don't do that, then you have a population of people who are subject to demagoguery. And then the response was to go directly into identity politics and the rather absurd claim that somehow the politics of the University of Bologna, in 1100, somehow has relevance to our situation today, and yet it's Holden Thorp's position that seems to be governing the entire upper crust and leadership structure of the sciences today. He's a very prominent example, but you have this in deans and college presidents and even department chairs, and it's very different from the kind of traditional way of nurturing students that I grew up in, and certainly you try to express as well. And I wonder if you have some thoughts about where this strange idea has come from and how it's come to dominate our sciences.
It's a puzzle, and I've read many explanations as to why this became so commonplace. And of course, the solutions to a problem, right? So you definitely have differential scores, grades, or you name it. And when I teach genetics, I use the differences between countries. So I come from Brazil, and Brazil has a country IQ of about 85. So significantly lower than the US, which is about 99 or 100, depending on what. And I get the students to think about why that would be. Why is there a difference, right? And, you know, I give them clicker questions, which is funny. Like I tell them, if anyone marks down that Brazilians are inherently dumb, I'm fail the course. And I don't know who the students are. I can't really follow up with that. But of course, the reasons cannot be known. There are these differences, and you know, knowing huge differences in culture that exist between countries, huge dramatic differences. My gist would be that those play a big role in differences in outcome. But even that is something that cannot be discussed, because we have decided that all cultures are equal and lead to the same outcome, which is not true. You know, in Brazil, for example, you have a very a culture where you cannot, if you are a good student at school, you really will have very few friends. Cheating is fully common, like the parents encourage it. My parents encourage it. It's a common thing in society. Everyone cheats. If you are a good student and you're not helping your friends, and I did help my friends when I was in high school, you would have no friends. So there is all of this culture where if you do not take advantage of a situation to your own gain, you are a loser. So if, for example, you go somewhere, you buy a coconut, and the person doesn't charge you, and you walk away with a free coconut, it's something to be celebrated. And of course, here, this is a horror, right? It's like it's not something you would brag about, certainly. And those differences are profound, and they are everywhere in society, and they play a huge role, but you're no longer able to point those things out. And it gets to the point where they actually try to teach in the US that things like punctuality, which is something that Latin America certainly does not have, is a white value. How do you want people to go ahead and thrive if you're teaching them that it's okay to be late? If you are late, nothing happens. Or the sense of urgency, for example, when they start talking about that, I remember throughout my childhood, we had leaks on the roof, and we would just put buckets. We would never fix them. So it would be like 5-6 buckets. Things would never be fixed. And yes, a sense of urgency is great. I wish we had it, right? You know, so instead of teaching the beneficial aspects of culture, they are trying to teach otherwise, that it's okay to be late. It's okay not to have a sense of urgency to complete your tasks. And those things just hold people back. So I don't think that people like Holden realize that they are acting in, Holden clearly has this culture, and he was doing jokes about being punctual and how all scientists are punctual, and he would be the first to run with his completed AP calculus test to the teacher. I didn't even have opportunity to take calculus in school, much less if I did that, I held my test and I ran to the teacher, I would be killed by my peers, you know? It's not something you do. So, you know, they push these ideas that it's okay to not be punctual while they have all those features, which are very, very positive. So it's incredibly detrimental to the people they're trying to help. And it baffles me. I don't understand why they can't see it. I think they don't understand how deep those differences are, and how detrimental some of them are. And you teach people, like, it's not knowledge that it's gonna lead to, you know, harm. Like recently we had, just the other day, a piece in Nature Human Behavior came out saying that you should not publish anything that may cause harm. And then they list a bunch of things, including differences between populations, between sexes, between LGBTQ, between, it's not knowledge that causes harm. It's politics, right? You have to come up with a policy that will cause harm. So let's say if they demonstrate that there are, let's say, differences between males and females, with females being, let's say, less ambitious, that per se doesn't cause any harm because there are differences between individuals. There's overlap.
Yeah.
So just that the means are different, who cares? Only if they enact policies based on this, that it could cause harm. But knowledge is knowledge, and we ought to know it and know to push back against, detrimental outcomes of the knowledge or not.
Yeah, I mean, the certainly the ethic when I was a graduate student was that science was something transcendent and it rose above politics. And you see this in well, you see the influence of politics all through 20th century science. The nuclear scientists before World War II, they were intensely involved in the political implications of what they were doing, and once science became basically a client of the federal government, and politics necessarily intruded into it. But it was always kind of a point of pride that we scientists would try to rise above that, and now that's not the case. There are forbidden thoughts and there are okay thoughts, and anytime you look at that, obviously when someone tries to shut down debate, that's an indicator of just how weak the case is, and I think that's certainly what's going on right now. But furthermore, it's a weak case that's supported by political power, and right now, identity politics is the ruling ideology of at least one of our political parties. I think it permeates both of them to a degree. But there's money and power at stake, and this is something that I think ordinary scientists like you and I don't really appreciate, just how much is going on behind the scenes in terms of political power and political influence. And when you combine that with the obvious kind of white masochism that Holden Thorp is suffering from, the result is just toxic, and I think that's what we're seeing now. So, getting back to the science of IQ, this is, as you said, this is one of these things that is, that we're forbidden to talk about, genetic differences, genetic determination of IQ and things like this. And it's kind of a curious thing for scientists to be arguing, because, after all, if you've delved into the literature of IQ, which you have, you know that this is something that's been tested and critically and rigorously, and it stands up. So it makes no sense to talk about denying, differences of nationalities or different races in this numerical score of IQ. But of course, it's a cognitive test. You would expect there to be racial differences in cognition, and after all, the races evolve in different kinds of environments, and one of the things that happens is people have to be able to interact cognitively with their environments, and if different environments would result in different ways of dealing with that. But what's missing is the equally important value of culture and tradition and things like this, which you have spoken about quite a bit. Yet we're split into these dogmatic camps now for some reason. It's either all blank slate or it's all genetic determinism, and I don't see a profitable way forward on that approach. I think there has to be something in between, and I wonder if you could give us your thoughts on what that in between is.
Yeah, no, it's hard to say. I mean, there is not even much research in the field for obvious reasons, right? But the interesting thing is that instead of engaging with the question, right? What is heritability? How you measure heritability? The students deny that intelligence can even be measured, right? So they deny, for example, that IQ is just so biased that doesn't measure anything at all, when in reality that isn't true. So I think what needs to be emphasized is that IQ does not measure the value of a human. You know, I do not come from a family with high IQ. My relatives are valuable, like incredibly valuable. It doesn't matter at all, right? My mother didn't complete school, but that doesn't make her any less than anyone else. You know, it's a wonderful person. So it does have a value in terms of, for example, it's highly correlated with educational achievement, right? But and salary, because salary is highly correlated with skills and education achievement. So it's not a measure that tells absolutely nothing. But people cannot see that the value of a human is not tied to IQ. So I think that in that sense, they're limited, right? I think that the view of many people is very limited, that they think that somehow the value of human life is tied to this measure, which is not. And that's, you know, that's should be if it wasn't, then people wouldn't be so nervous about talking about, you know, something that varies between individuals certainly has a large genetic component, just like height. And yet for height, you know, people don't think that shorter people are less valuable than tall people. So, you know, they're more comfortable in talking about that. But, you know, in terms of understanding what heritability is, in order to understand even how artificial selection can work, even how agriculture can work, is a very important thing for biologists. So when students start to even deny the existence of heritability, which they do for many traits, including any traits that have to do with behavior, they deny the existence of heritability. Not all of them, some students have in the past. So that's problematic, right? Because they're not understanding, you know, selection, biology, everything that goes with heritability.
Yeah. You know, there's an interesting kind of paradox embedded in the middle of a lot of this discussion. You know, as you know, colleges and universities are increasingly bringing identity politics criteria to hiring, interviewing, promotion, retention, and those kinds of things. And the argument is often made that, well, you need to diversify your scientific workforce because women, Black people, Hispanics, et cetera, are going to bring different perspectives to problems that are difficult to solve. Okay. And if you look at IQ as a heritable measure of cognition, I don't want to say cognitive ability because that's automatically ranking better to worse. If those kinds of heritable differences in cognition do exist, then they have a point. You know, they have a point. Maybe we should have more women who can bring perspectives just by virtue of being genetically women. Or the same kind of argument could be made for, well, we need more Black scientists because Black people being, you know, having different cognitive perceptions can bring different perspectives to problems, and that's you know, that's logically where that ideology takes us, but it's something that's causes a lot of discomfort, and in part the discomfort comes from, you know, what is it that actually makes for a good scientific career? You know, is it these unique cognitive perceptions that makes for good science, or are there other attributes of cognition, things like curiosity, hard work, self-motivation, all these kinds of things that are key to a successful scientific career? And so you've been in different cultures. You came to the United States from Brazil. Again, you have an interesting perspective on the influence that culture has on the ability to be a successful scientist. So is that the way out of it? To invoke attributes that are independent of what IQ can measure, as a means of countering the intrusion of woke ideology into the sciences?
Yeah, yes, I think that many of the attributes you mentioned are essential for good science. In fact, I can't remember who was the famous physics person that won a Nobel Prize that didn't even have, like, he revealed his IQ and wasn't even very high. So obviously, like, the passion, right, the almost obsession with a particular topic will make a good scientist. If someone is constantly thinking and preoccupied about a certain thing, they will do work in that area and will be highly productive. Now, it's interesting that this idea that you bring in people of different sexes or different ethnicities and different races, you will bring diversity of thought. I think that at some point that had some truth to it, and I think that if you look at people from different countries, there might be some small truth to it. But because at the same time, we are enforcing a political ideology that is very conformist, right? So at the same time, academia has become incredibly non-diverse in political viewpoints, in how you see social issues. So the diversity does not bring as much diversity of thought as once it did. So I believe that if you were in the 70s, you would bring diversity of thought to bring people from different backgrounds, different social classes, etc. And nowadays, less and less, because there is almost a sieve where only a certain political view can pass through academia. And I've seen students here who were conservative and went to graduate school. I had a total of 2. None of them finished their degree. And I never talked to them again to know if that was because, they didn't feel comfortable or something, or any other personal reasons I don't know about. But there is definitely a sieve.
Yeah, this gets us into the nurturing, to use that word, of embryonic scientists, so to speak, and the whole issue of nurturing, it's the same way lots of places. It's almost like a family relationship. You have your major professor, and the major professor's intellectual offspring, and you have intellectual grandparents, and all this, and it's a very close nurturing environment, and it really has to be, in order to give students the courage to actually get out and challenge established ideas and so forth. And one of the things of this enforced conformity coming down from the top is that it's like coming in and breaking up that family. It's saying, you, the scientists, practicing scientists, are not competent to nurture these students, and therefore we administrators must do it for you. We have to come in and interfere. And a lot of this is built upon the argument that you just said some people make, which is that certain kinds of ideas cause harm to people, and therefore we cannot cause harm to people. And it's down to the point where even harmless jokes are treated as some kind of crime. And in fact, Holden Thorp was involved in one instance at the University of North Carolina when he was chancellor, where he actually came down very hard on someone who was actually just telling a joke. And of course, it happened to be a student group that didn't have favored political opinions on the UNC campus. So that's a problem we run into continually. the opposition or the imputation of harm to certain groups is very politically one-sided, and again, it's all to enforce a certain conformity of thought, which is just anathema to what we should be doing as academics. And this leads us into something that you just published in Heterodox STEM. It's a very fine site founded by Dorian Abbott on a Substack. And you actually looked into what the effect is of this kinds of enforced conformity and ideology is on the actual things you need to become a good scientist. And I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that.
Sure. So the piece you're referring to was about the over surveillance, I should say, of sexual harassment at conferences. And I happen to come from a country where sexual harassment was prevalent, was everywhere. People don't believe that, but even my undergraduate advisor had naked woman posters in his office. It was prevalent. In the US, it was like paradise, right? There was never, I never encountered issues in the US. Flirting at conferences is common, but people were incredibly polite here. They really stop if you signal that you're not happy. My society recently hired a consultant, and they're not the only society. I know the Geology Society did so as well. There's a number of other societies that hired the same consultant to basically police the conference. So they put they call allies with buttons, and they are quite substantial buttons on their shirt. And they walk around, they come a day in advance to receive training, or 2 days in advance to receive training. And they walk around the poster session, like watching interactions. And of course, all of that leads to a chilling in interactions, right? So especially older males may not be so cool in interacting with younger females because they may be perceived as harassers. And recently there was a paper, not in biology, but in economics, of the results of the Me Too movement, which is a dramatic decrease in new collaborations between males and females. So the result of this fear of being perceived as a harasser or being denounced as a harasser has led to many men not seeking to interact with women anymore, especially young women. And of course, who's being harmed are the women that don't get the great collaborators they would have. I've had great male collaborators over my life. My advisor was a male, fantastic. And it's a huge loss. And, in the name of goodness, I think all these people, they think that they're doing good. They think they're doing good in policing and policing language now. My college got to the unbelievable steps of training TAs about microaggression, and the word guys is a word that we can no longer say. And, and as that word becomes rare, I'm sure there will be a new one and a new one. So, it's a never ending search for new offenses, new aggressions. And when you pay consultants who make money out of that to be the trainers, they will for sure find ever more offensive micro nano aggressions now, like ever increasing number of them, to justify their own existence. So, these consultants, they make thousands of dollars at every conference. The cost is relatively small for each participant, so people don't push back. But you imagine what could be done with this money, right? You could use this money to actually bring undergraduates that don't have money to pay to go to conferences, or graduate students from poorer schools that don't have money to pay for them to go to conferences. And instead, we are wasting money paying police to walk among us, all adults, by the way. There is only a handful of undergraduates that go to these conferences. it's offensive to both men that are perceived as being a harasser and women that are perceived to be like useless, unable to defend themselves. You know, if there is a true event of harassment, you call the police. It already exists. So I don't understand. Like,
yeah, this is very true. You know, and you know, when you talk about the costs actually to students, you know, we've been looking into the budgets of diversity and inclusion at MIT, for example, and they have 95 administrative level positions devoted to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you know, when you look at the amount of money that is spent on that, you could give at least half-time college scholarships to every student at MIT, and you know, that's but you know, the source of the money that pays for this is another kind of scandal that needs to be uncovered, but nobody really seems to be going into uncovering it. And so this brings me to my next question. You spoke about the kind of you know, political commissars running around meetings and things like that, making sure that everyone is expressing correct thoughts and so forth and so on. What kind of pushback has been coming from students and also from faculty against that sort of thing? Because faculty are supposed to be the ones in charge of the university. It's administrators that are supposed to work for faculty, not the other way around. So what kind of pushback are you seeing from colleagues and from students against this sort of thing?
Open pushback is very little. There will be one or two students that write op-eds and push back. Oftentimes they are students of color because they're more protected. A white student would be immediately called racist, sexist, or whatnot, so they prefer to stay silent. And the same is true with professors, right? You have like sometimes very unreasonable requests, like, you know, here in my campus, students have complained about a book that uses the word Indian instead of Native American, and not even to mention that I think most Native Americans prefer the word Indian over Native Americans, but no, not the students here don't know that. And you know, then the professors becoming really worried about what to do. Should they change the book? You know, in the psychology department, they start receiving complaints about the word pregnant woman, and the professor steps back and now uses person with a uterus. And you know, it's making language into a violence, right? It's like it creates violence when there is none. A person saying a pregnant woman is correct 99.99999% of the time. She's not doing that as an aggression towards the very rare trans men that get pregnant, but it's, you know, it's this spiraling thing that, you know, as you change to a person with a uterus, then there is a new complaint. And in this case of this professor, the new complaint is that she's using correct terms, but doesn't really mean it. So, you know, there is never a satisfying because they're always after some new aggression, violence, as they make the language into a violent thing. Many students don't agree with that, but they're quiet in their classrooms. And I feel that in my interactions with students, I feel that the science students tend to be very against this cancel culture. And it's more prevalent and not at all absolute. It's very few students, but the fear of cancellation is very high. And, you know, we are evolutionary biologists. We understand that in our past, to be canceled, to be ostracized was death. So if you were rejected by your group, you were dead. So it's completely understandable why people are afraid. You know, it is terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that has struck me about the response of our colleagues to what I think is basically an assault on core principles of scientific discourse is that the way the political and economic climate has been set up, it's actually the rational choice to jump onto this diversity, inclusion, or identity politics bandwagon, because there are lots of rewards that follow from it, and there are lots of penalties that follow from not pursuing it. And when I was an active teacher, I used to have a lecture on climate change. Let's take a step back and not panic, and let's look at the actual science behind it. And every year I did that, I would get 2 or 3 students who would surreptitiously come to me, either by email or in my office, saying, "I'm so glad you said this," because they can't say it out loud. I'd always hoped to have good discussions in class, and they never happen because, students are incentivized not to speak up, and this is where we need to be pushing back against this basically illiberal trend, not just against administrators and politicians, but in some cases against our own colleagues as well. And you, in addition to your fame from your encounter with Holden Thorp, you've been on some panels recently on just how to approach this problem, how to fix this problem, how to kind of make the ship of science come right. But before you answer that, I just need to do some housekeeping here. Questions and answers are welcome. You'll see the little question and answer button at the bottom of the Zoom thing. I see that a couple are trickling in. Please put your questions there in the Q&A feed, and we'll be coming to the questions momentarily. But back to the question at hand. What do we do, and what has been the gist of the discussions in these panels and groups that you have been involved in?
Mm-hmm. So it's of course the problem is big, right? Because we have the administrations of most of our universities, right, largely taken by these views. Actions that are incredibly detrimental to students. There is a new one in my college where is an anti-racist action where they no longer give grades to students and they allow the students to self-grade instead. I've seen the comments from students in the equivalent of rate my professor, and it's like, I did nothing for this course, gave myself an A. These things are incredibly detrimental and applauded by some, but when it gets to this point, I think people can start to see how detrimental these actions are. So start to point out that these, low-hanging fruit, these are detrimental actions. Telling people that saying, a professor saying guys is being God knows what offensive is a low-hanging fruit. I think most people realize that this is absurd. Pointing out, like speaking out if you can, is great, and forming, finding groups of colleagues that agree, and not being alone, right? So when you speak out, you're not alone, and there will be other people supporting you in these discussions, and of course there will be many battles lost, right? It's impossible in this climate, but I think if people start to talk more, and push back against this incredibly censorious climate, it's a great start, especially for those of us who have tenure and can actually talk without risk of being fired. And that's not the risk with no trouble, right? There are certain people in my campus that will not look at me. They turn their faces when I walk, right? So there is that, but I'm not going to be fired, and I do have a support group. And talking to students, I start to teach, like this semester, I'm teaching a course that will be on controversial topics. It's an evolutionary biology course, but we're going to talk about the existence of biological sexes. We have a number of debates. We have debates about whether we should race in medicine, for example, was very controversial last time I taught. So, you know, I think speaking out and letting others know that they are not alone. So, you know, if you only encounter the very, very woke people, you may think that you are the only one that think the way you do, but that isn't true. There are many people who agree and are silent. So locating these people and starting to make your voice heard.
Yeah, I think that's an important part of it, but there are two other aspects of it. I mean, you've been following the controversy over Amy Wax and her statements, you know, and irrespective of what you think about them, you know, she is a tenured professor, highly respected in her field, and all this, and tenure doesn't seem to be being much of a protection for her, and you know, this is one area that maintains this climate of intimidation. But the thing that concerns me the most is, what do you do for the untenured faculty, you know, and what do you do for the students who are aspiring to academic careers? And in the first episode of this series, we had two very interesting people, Stephen Turner and Daryl Chubin, on the show, and they had written some very interesting things about the changing ethic of the sciences. You know, that we've gone from an ethic of discovery to an ethic of productivity. You're judged by how many papers you put out, how many grants you get, and how many students you train, and all these sorts of things. And one of the points that they made was that enforcing this ethic of production involves a kind of administrative heavy-handedness that is now giving us, you know, woke ideology being imposed on the sciences, but it also just turns off scientists. You know, it turns off prospective scientists. You know, once undergraduate students get a glimpse of what really goes on behind the scenes, they want nothing to do with the scientific career. You know, and you know, that's akin to what you wrote about in Heterodox STEM, which is that, you know, this good intention, I'm not so sure it's good, to be honest, to enforce politeness between different you know, ethnic groups or men and women on campus is actually having a perverse effect, the opposite effect. And so in these panels, you know, have any ideas come out about how it is that you protect the untenured? In fact, how you protect the tenured against you know, administrations that are quite content to ignore the rules of tenure, and what do you do about the students? You know.
No, it's terrifying. I mean, I don't know if you saw in the MIT that they now have an anonymous complaint page, right, where you can simply put a comment about anyone without giving your name, without, you know, so you don't like someone, you know, you can put a complaint about them, and it's just terrifying. Yeah, and you know, we are lucky. We're seeing the growth of some like FIRE, right? There's some foundations that are growing, and they can offer some level of protection. So FIRE has lawyers 24/7 for anyone. They have a hotline now that you can call if you are in trouble with cancellation. This is great. I think that if there are a few who can speak and put the university in the headlights, you know, call attention to the trouble that is going on inside, the alums don't like that, right? So they get in their case, and I think that can at least slow down the train, right? It's like it can help a little bit, but it's definitely incredibly risky for someone who doesn't have tenure to speak out. It's incredibly risky. They could lose their jobs, or
Well, thank heavens people like you are doing so. And okay, so we have questions trickling in on the Q&A. Should we go to the questions? Should we have a look at what those are saying? Okay, so let's go through them. I'm sure many will be coming in. We have 5 so far. So I believe the viewers can see the threads. So let's go to Jabud first, or J.A. Bud. I'm not sure what that means. So the ruling factor of science lies within science, its laws in quotes. The ruling factor of society lies within its members, the ruling aristocracy. How can the two ruling components be kept separate? And you know, we see this in the jockeying for supremacy on campuses. It once was administrators were the minority and they served faculty, whereas now it's just the opposite. And I think this question is coming from that perspective. So how can the two ruling components be kept separate? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the you know, the college here, for example, they used to be run entirely by professors. There was pretty much no hired administrators. So in some ways, I think it would be healthier if they were not kept entirely separate within universities, you know, that the professors had a say in, you know, whether you're gonna accept the demands of students to disinvite someone, for example. If that was decided by professors and not administrators, I think we would be in a very different place. So perhaps in some sense, the trouble is that we are keeping them way too separate.
Yeah, I think the whole idea, the fashion in recent years of so-called shared governance has played a significant role in this. You know, it all sounds very good, you know, but it reminds me of a joke that Desmond Tutu once told about South Africa. You know, he said, well, when we were here before the Dutch came, we had the land, and when the Dutch came, they had the Bible, and they invited us to pray together, and we closed our eyes and we prayed. We opened our eyes. They had the land and we had the Bible. And I think that's kind of what's been happening in academia right now. You know, we've been promised good administration, cooperative administration, and we've ended up with administrations basically dominating us, becoming our bosses. Completely contrary, by the way, to the opposition. Well, former opposition of the AAUP, the group that is supposed to be protecting our interests, you know, they got their start as opposition to the hired man concept of professors. You know, they could hire or fire them as they wished, you know. Now that's gone. The hired man concept is coming back, and it's coming back strong. Okay, so we have a question here. Yes, okay, let's go to the next one here. John Radisky says he found one example of the merits of viewpoint diversity. Let's have a look at what that example is. The egg and the sperm. I'm going to share the screen here with this so everyone can see. Here we are. Get the question thread out of the way here. How science has constructed a romance based on stereotypical male-female models. Okay, well, all I can say is, without reading it, it sounds very interesting. I could give my very superficial thoughts on that. Luana, do you have any thoughts? Do you know this person or don't know the story?
Well, given that the publication date was 1991, right? So
yes.
things have changed very dramatically between then and now, for sure.
Yeah. I wonder if
very interesting. I'll take a look.
Yeah. I wonder if John could throw a comment into the comment thread about what he found interesting about this. Okay, J.A. Budd or Jabud, I hope I'm getting that correctly. Has anyone looked at the size of a university endowment and the absurdity or degree of wokeness? I think my opinion is it's a universal illness. Every college and university has that we've been looking into. We've been actually surveying this quite extensively here at the National Association of Scholars, and this has become almost the universal level of absurdity. And let me just stop sharing the screen so we can see each other again. Now, I think places with big university endowments can weather things a little bit easier. They're more free, if you will, to do foolish things, just like heirs of great fortunes are free to do foolish things. But it seems to be universal in our experience. What's your thoughts on that, Luana?
Yeah, so I think that if you have a lot of money, it's more likely that they're going to hire an ever increasing DEI bureaucracy. So in some ways, I've never seen something that linked directly endowment to, let's say, DEI bureaucracy, but my guess is that there is one. But
Yeah,
one, so I can't be sure.
Yeah, I mean, these DEI bureaucracies have to be paid for somehow, and they're very, very expensive. It's all part of the administrative bloat issue that we've known about for almost a decade now. But the university endowments don't seem to be being tapped to pay for this kind of thing. You know, what's really paying for it, it seems, and this is all hidden behind a whole web of accounting tricks and things like this, is federal money that comes in the form of indirect cost research grants, which in American universities are very high compared to other countries with national research programs, and also the virtually risk-free income that accrues to student loans and Pell Grants. And I think there's a tremendous amount of abuse that's going on there. One hopes that someone will lift the lid on this, because somehow this is being paid for, this very expensive thing is being paid for, and we don't really entirely know, and no one really wants to tell us how it's being paid for, and somehow we have to get to the bottom of it. Okay, Kitty Mama, I don't know if that's a turn of phrase on Kitty Mama. I don't want to be too presumptuous here, but how do these extremist ideologies escape from the lunatic fringes of academia and conquer the sciences? My short answer to that is that you, the taxpayer, have been paying for it, and I wonder if you have some thoughts on that, Luana.
Yeah, they definitely did escape, and I think it's it's a narrative. I mean, I do think that most people are very well intentioned, so they believe that there is something holding some groups back that needs to be fought, and then as university starts to apologize for actually admitting guilt from being that group, for being systemically this, systemically racist, systemically sexist. There are many people who will believe them. Why not? They're saying it themselves, you know. And people who are well intentioned, they want to see, you know, the world a better place. They do feel sorry, and you know, and it's they don't think the step ahead. What is the consequences of, you know, overtraining people about microaggressions? You know, how will a person that embraces this worldview will live? They don't think about that. So in the end, these initiatives end up harming rather than helping. We see it happening in schools everywhere now, where they want to get rid of AP classes, they want to get rid of SAT, they want to get rid of grades, they want to get rid. Nothing of this is going to help people. It's actually going to hold people back. So a lot of students are motivated by grades, and oftentimes these people who advocate this, they are not. They were actually motivated by learning, so they think everybody's like them, but that isn't true. So they do not realize how harmful those initiatives are going to be.
Yeah, yeah. Amity Shlaes has written a book recently on the Great Society. You know, the thing that came in with the LBJ administration, and she makes the same point. You know, the roots of the Great Society were deeply embedded in good intentions. You know, and a perception of virtue. This is the virtuous thing to do, and you know, this was you know, the failures of the Great Society are all around us. I'm not sure how you feel about this, Luana, but you know, it's a similar kind of thing. These good intentions, when they're backed up by government power, take on a life of their own, which makes it almost impossible for rational discussion to take place, because politics, after all, is driven by the need for votes and donations and all these kinds of things. I'm getting one comment from Michael Dean, no sound. It's the only one that I've heard so far. Michael, I hope this you can get your sound back. Okay, all right. So let's move on. Here's something from Wesley Brown. It's clear that during, and much more so post-World War II, American academia has increasingly been beholden to the federal government for much funding and escalating tuition costs, an increasingly upward spiral with no slowdown in sight. And I will just comment on that. You know, we've looked into the patterns of federal funding of science, and it's right now the total federal investment in academic research is about $80 billion a year, and that's about 60% of the total, with the rest of which comes from foundations and things like this. And the remarkable thing about what we found is that it's an exponential curve, as you have said, with a doubling time about every 7 years, and you get occasional blips here and there, but nothing seems to have slowed this trend. And this comes back to what we were mentioning a few minutes ago about these things take on lives of their own, which often take them far away from their original intent, and often original good intent, to be perfectly fair. And you know, I ran into this when I was an active faculty member. I don't mean to dominate the conversation, Luana, but I increasingly faced pressure to apply for more and more grants, even though I didn't really need them to do my scholarship. You know, I was able to support my scholarship, my scholarly activities quite well, but it wasn't expensive. And I was therefore not a team player, because I wasn't getting more grants to bring in more indirect costs to the university. I wonder if you've had any kind of experiences or perceptions along those lines. Do you feel the pressure to pursue money just for the sake of getting money?
No, so here is very different because I am in a liberal arts college, right? So few people have grants. I actually have had several grants, which they're very happy, but the pressure is much lower. So our tenure decision, for example, does not depend on having gotten a grant before, which is not the case for most research universities. We also do not have graduate students, so we don't have to pay their tuition or their fees or anything with grants, which is the case in many research schools. So for me, that pressure is very small.
Yeah. One of the eye-opening things in my early career, I took a 1-year sabbatical replacement position at a small liberal arts college, Franklin and Marshall, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And I came there from a fairly high-powered research university, and I was blown away at just how free those people at Franklin and Marshall were to pursue interesting stuff, you know, for the very same reason that you just outlined. You know, the pressure to bring in lots of grant money for the sake of money wasn't really there, and so I have a lot of time for liberal arts colleges like yours. Okay, so let's see here. Where are we now? Yes. Okay. Cliff Banner says, very nice thing here. I like the general tone of the discussion between Scott and Luana. Could you review what institutions are being represented by Scott and Luana? Well, I'll go first. I, for 30 years, was a professor of biology at the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse, New York. I retired 3 years ago, and I'm now a member of the National Association of Scholars. Luana?
I did my PhD at Cornell University. I spent some time in University of Cambridge in the UK, and the Smithsonian Institute in Panama. And now I'm at Williams College. I've been here for the past 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I spent a wonderful sabbatical at Cambridge, actually. And yeah, so wonderful place. Okay, Terry Gannon, the attack on science is an attack on meritocracy. I agree with that. The progression has no end. Any comments? Well, it's easy to feel despair about this. It's hard to see how it can be stopped, but I think it can be in some unexpected ways. But Luana, what do you think?
It's definitely an attack on meritocracy. It's amazing how controversial this topic has become, given how uncontroversial it should be, right? It's like, you know, it's funny that people confuse things. They think meritocracy, for example, is counting papers, and therefore we shouldn't use meritocracy, but that isn't really, right? That's perhaps one way to measure, which is a poor way. You know, when you measure merit in a professor, you're going to measure, like, you know, teaching, you're going to measure application for grants, you're going to measure paper, you're going to measure the quality of the paper. There is all kinds of things that go into meritocracy. So in one end, you have people like Holden Thorp publishing that, who is talking about decreasing meritocracy? Nobody ever said that. We just have to find different ways of teaching, you know, but not revealing what those different ways of teaching actually mean, which many of them involve, for example, allowing students to self-grade, which is a movement called ungrading. You know, or admitting people not based on their CVs, but based on some other aspect of, you know, some diversity measurement. And it really is, if you think deeply, right? It's a deeply racist notion that you basically have to drop merit if you want to hire someone from another sex, race, ethnicity. I was directly told that by a DEI trainer that it's basically a quote that when evaluating the CV of a Latina woman, you should keep into your mind that they cannot be as productive as other women because they have more obligations towards the family. So, you know, here's a person saying that, oh, it's not because they're dumber or incapable. They just have, you know, they have to do all their housework. And if you think of that, you know, why am I not free to decide how much housework, how much academic, you know, scholarship I do with my own time? It's a profoundly racist idea.
Yeah, and it's also tied in with, you know, as you mentioned, just what is it that you mean by merit, you know, and this is where this really interesting idea of a transition from an ethic of discovery to an ethic of production comes in, you know, because, you know, now the merit is measured by supposedly objective metrics of scientific productivity, which of course, you know, has virtually no relationship to what science is supposed to do, which is discover new knowledge. But of course, the trouble with, well, the trouble perceived by some of dealing with an ethic of discovery is that you necessarily get into some kind of subjectivity of judgment. And we just went through that debate in the final years of my active faculty service at environmental science and forestry. You know, there was a very strong debate between, you know, do we have a matrix of things that we can tick off to as a qualification for tenure, or do we talk about the person's work and you know, bring our judgments, professional judgments, to it on the quality? And this is something I think that we in the sciences are deeply confused and uncertain about right now. And I think that's one of the reasons why this identity politics is having such an undue influence on what we do. Okay, and here's J.A. Budd again. Separate can mean a control of size. Should there be as many administrators as there are productive faculty, in quotes. And I would just say that for many years we got by with a relatively small number of administrators and did perfectly good science and did perfectly good teaching, and we were okay on that. But of course, now the reverse is the case,
and I think it's in part because the students are being told basically that they need ever more coddling, right? So, you know, you have like a dean for each student, right? A dean is assigned for each student. And it justifies having ever more deans because every student has a problem. So, you know, and, you know, the number of psychotherapists in campus has been increasing very dramatically, and in part this is because the students want more because it became destigmatized and it may be helpful. In other, it could also be that they are encouraged to seek more help all the time. So we have like a department that helps with disabilities, and one that helps with mental issues, and the one that helps with you know, inclusion issues, and it never ends. So you're staffing ever more, and the students are using the services, which justifies getting ever more services. And I believe that in part this is this cell that language is a violence, and you should be offended and you should be hurt if you see something, or if someone doesn't greet you or doesn't use your pronouns. It is a reason to seek help because now you are harmed. So I think that in part this is due to these issues.
Yeah. Let's see here. What's next here? So Cliff Banner is back again. As Kitty Mama suggests, Kita Mama, is there a way to shame these ridiculous stances of the bureaucracy of college administrators that increasingly support woke positions and thus limit real science? I wish we had plumbed the depths of shame, but I'm afraid we haven't. So I was part of an NSF panel once, and we had sitting in someone from NSF's Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and we were basically told that she had veto power over our decisions on what was worthy science and what wasn't, and you know, I don't know how much more shameful you can get on that, but maybe there's a limit. The key is, are there any instances that we can think of where administrations have been forced to back down in the face of real opposition from faculties? Luana, can you think of any?
I can think of things that have happened in my college that they first jump into the student explanation and they take that for granted. Yes, that's what happened. This professor is a bigot. And then the facts come out, and the facts clearly do not support the initial student explanations, and then the administration has to back down. It happens in little things like that.
Yeah. I mean, thinking of, I'm just sitting here thinking of instances, and the most prominent one I can think of is what happened over the recent campaign to cancel Thomas Huxley at University College London. You know, you know, he was supposedly racist, thought bad thoughts, or said bad things, even though that was just not Thomas Huxley at all. And there was a nationwide campaign against that, and they finally did back down down on this. So it is possible to get these administrators and actually this was a faculty committee, I'm embarrassed to say, but there is a way to shame them into backing down. But I think an even more egregious example of the depths to which shame goes here, I just think back on the shameless thing that happened to Brett Weinstein and Heather Haying at Evergreen State College. Now this is a state college, and I was just blown away by what happened. I could not believe the administration was doing to them what they did. And so I don't know, maybe the tide will turn if it gets egregious enough. Kidamama is back. She's asking I'm not sure which. Mama, I suppose, means female. How does DIE wokeness affect affirmative action? Affirmative action was a suggestion. DEI is the iron fist behind it. That's my feeling on it. Luana?
It's very interesting, right? Because affirmative action started with outreach to get more individuals to apply to positions, like truly, I think, beneficial actions, right? So if you have someone that doesn't know how to apply for a college because their family is not educated, there is no one to guide them, then you send administrators to help them do that. And it's something that Williams still does. They buy names, they do outreach, and I think that those things are a positive thing of affirmative action, right? To give chance to someone who was fully capable but didn't know how or didn't have the knowledge, and there is a knowledge involved, right? It's like there is definitely a knowledge involved in knowing where to apply, how to apply, not go to the local community college, go to the more prestigious place that will accept you. And over time, this led to a definite increase in diversity across all universities, but I guess it wasn't at the pace that they liked. So they started implementing ever more and now detrimental actions, which is this, like nowadays, you drop SAT, so you accept anyone at a university, but if the person is not at the same level of knowledge as other people, you're setting them to failure, you're setting them to getting a financial burden in paying tuition, and then not completing their degree or completing their degree in an area that is not going to be useful. I think that there is data showing that the result of this lowering meritocracy in order to fulfill expectations of quotas, basically, has led to many promising students going to universities where they were not academically matched and not being able to graduate with a science degree. So, there is a definite, you're always comparing yourself to others, right? So if you are struggling in a course, nobody else seems to be struggling in a course, you tend to think you're not very good at that thing and dropping. So the difference between the student going to a local state school versus going to Harvard can be huge. So a student that would be completely fine in a local state school and is then put at Harvard might not graduate with a science degree and thus might not go to medicine or something that would be more fulfilling, ends up graduating with some studies degree instead, and that's a huge loss. So it's where it becomes detrimental.
Jay Budd is back with diabolical evil parades as a good. Yes, the road to hell is often paved with good intentions, and that's another way of saying that. But Terry Gannon asks, what can limit DEI reach? And my own thought on that is that that's kept going by an enormous influx of oxygen in the form of dollars paying for this, and what will limit it would be to cut off the oxygen somehow. Now, that's the easy answer. Getting to the doable answer is an entirely different issue altogether. There's a lot of power and money at stake that keeps this going. A lot of rice bowls that are being filled because of it, and To quote Calvin Coolidge, one of our underappreciated presidents, I think the solution is at the ballot box. You know, that's what's going to have to do this. While we're on Calvin Coolidge, by the way, someone asked what the name of the book was about the Great Society, which I mentioned. I've typed in the answer. Her name is Amity Shlaes, Shlaes, and the book is The Great Society and A New History. But she's written some fascinating books. There was The Forgotten Man, which is a new history of the New Deal. And while we're on Coolidge, she wrote a fascinating biography of Calvin Coolidge as well. So I'd recommend her to anyone. But getting back to the question, what will limit it? What are your thoughts, Luana?
I think that when they take an action that is so obviously detrimental, ridiculous, absurd, like the ungrading movement, for example, which anyone who has been a student knows that is going to be detrimental, that's when you can start pushing back, and without the risk of being called a racist, because the very action can be perceived as a harmful to the very people they want to protect. So when they start to take this overreach, like, and it happens, it has happened here big time in my college. And when they did that, there was a pushback, just like Evergreen, you mentioned Evergreen, right? Evergreen did a big overstep on their insanity, and the pushback was very severe. Of course, Brett has lost his job, but so did the professor that was behind all of the insanity. So when something really big happens that everyone sees how absurd the whole thing is, that's the moment to push back on them, to make it public, to make it visible on news, to record and make something, right? So that's how they lose territory a little bit, at least.
Yeah, I think the concept of preference cascade is relevant here. You know, it's a, you know, the preference cascade, as you probably know, comes when enough people realize that other people are thinking the same thing I am, and what nonsense this is, and then all of a sudden it's a collapse. And I have a feeling that's what's going to limit DEI reach. There's going to be a preference cascade where people finally get fed up with being called racist. There's perfectly decent people who are being fed up or get fed up with being called racist, and they just say enough. And that's unpredictable when that's going to happen, and who knows what damage is going to be done before we get to that point. Let's see here. Here's another very nice comment. Scott and Luana, your answers are excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And here, just hearing the two of you instead of whatever the mass media reports gives the rest of us just a twinkle of hope. Keep that spark burning, please, out there. And Cliff says thanks again, and that's a very nice thing to for him to say. And but I do think it's essential. You know, I spend most of my time in a spawn of despair, but I do occasionally have twinkles of hope. Usually, an encounter with a student or a valued colleague or things like that. So yeah, keep that alive. What about you, Luana? You have some people that give you hope?
Oh, definitely, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and we have, since the meltdown I mentioned in my campus, we have become much stronger. We have created a network of people who are opposed to.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Cliff, for that. Wesley Brown says, yes, there are many feeding at the government PC troughs, no doubt about it. Lack of a debate and suppression of debate suppresses learning and knowledge. What to do? You'll get no argument from either Luana or I on that question. What to do? I don't know. I think just hang in there and keep pushing back. And J.A. Budd comes back with DEI attempts to control the outcome while ignoring the improvement of the input. Okay, that's an interesting point. So, you know, the problem with undergraduate education starts in high schools and the primary schools, and that's a major area of I don't want to say neglect, but lack of attention from colleges and administrators, especially. There's lots of action, but very little attention to the problem at hand. And Terry Gannon, with respect to Evergreen, comes back and says Evergreen's enrollment went way down, by the way. So maybe they did pay a price after all. So I don't know. All right, so we're nearing the end of our time. It's been a wonderful conversation, Luana. Do you have any final thoughts?
Not really. You?
Well, I just wanted to express my appreciation and actually my admiration for you being willing to step up and speak truth to power, so to speak.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
Okay, Luana, it was a wonderful conversation. And to our listeners, the next Restoring the Sciences webinar, I'm afraid I don't have the date right now, but it'll be in about a month, will be on artificial intelligence. So tune in then, you'll get notices from National Association of Scholars. So with that, on behalf of the National Association of Scholars, good night to everyone. I have to say good night, by the way, because I'm across the Atlantic in Namibia, 6 hours ahead. So even though it's late afternoon for you, it's quite late at night for me. So that's why I say good night. Good day to all of you, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.